Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Brew and Politics podcast. I'm your host, Mia Thorson.
Hi, my name's Caroline, and I'm the research analyst for the Brew and Politics podcast.
We want to welcome you to the ninth episode of the Brew and Politics podcast, titled Reproductive Rights in the U.S. Regarding the Texas Abortion Law. So, in this episode, we're going to highlight the issues and controversy surrounding the quote unquote heartbeat bill that was recently signed into law in Texas and its implications on the legal system and national reproductive rights. Today, we are talking with Ignite at UCLA's president, Filza Vaid, a third-year public affairs major, and internal vice president, Sara Gibson, a third-year public affairs major.
So, first, we wanted to start off with some background on the Texas abortion law, also known as SB 8. According to the New York Times, the law bans most abortions after about 6 weeks of pregnancy, which is the heartbeat of the fetus can first be monitored. However, many women don't even realize that they're pregnant until after this time. There are several other states with similar heartbeat bills, but the Texas law is the first of these that has actually gone into effect. Now, there are limited exemptions to the law, however, they only relate to the health of the mother. For instance, if keeping the pregnancy would threaten the mother's life, in limited cases, an abortion is allowed after the heartbeat period of 6 weeks. The lack of exemptions in the Texas law is part of the reason why it is so controversial because it does not provide exemptions for cases of rape or incest. Now, to get into the structure of the law itself, it's written in a way that allows any citizen to bring forth a civil lawsuit against anybody facilitating an abortion after the 6 week period. This could include a doctor performing the procedure, an Uber or Lyft driver taking a patient to an abortion clinic, anybody providing financial assistance, etc. In effect, the law allows citizens to target abortion providers or anybody aiding and abetting in the acquisition of one. This provision is exceptionally notable because it means that private citizens, rather than public officials, are essentially enforcing the law. In addition, unlike in a normal civil lawsuit, members of the public who seek to sue abortion providers do not need to have standing in the lawsuit. This means that private citizens who have absolutely no relation to any participant in the abortion or the abortion itself can sue the woman, her abortion provider, or anybody who helps her procure an abortion. Anybody who wins a lawsuit against an abortion provider can be awarded as much as $10,000 or more. Essentially, the law incentivizes citizens to stop abortion in the state of Texas in exchange for a profit. Since it last took effect on September 1st, the Citizen Enforcement Clause in the Texas law has fulfilled its intended purpose, dramatically curtailing the number of abortions performed in the state.
Thank you so much, Caroline. That was really informative. There's even some things on there that I didn't know. So I'm going to kind of get us started and transition into general questions and uh, allow our guests kind of introduce ourselves. We're so excited to have you guys. So to start off with introducing you all and your guys' different perspectives on this bill, I'm going to open the floor with how did you first learn about this bill and why do you think it's significant to the overall abortion debate in the United States? And whichever of you wants to go first is more than welcome.
I can go. Yeah, I think I first learned about this bill on Twitter, which is it's funny. I think I just like woke up one morning and I was scrolling through Twitter and I was like, "Whoa, wait, what's happening?" And then from Twitter, I went straight to Politico, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, what is happening?" Um, and I think it's really, really important to the overall abortion debate because I feel like this is one of the biggest efforts to undermine Roe v. Wade. I feel like it's been something talked about for a long time, but there wasn't any real progress on it. And then suddenly, women in Texas, like they can't get access. Um, yeah, Sarah, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I kind of first heard about it also through social media. And quickly I was like getting texts and calls. Like my grandma is also very like invested in like Planned Parenthood, and she has been since like I would say she's like a really big activist. And she called me and just like was like really worried. So I obviously like looked into it more, and like Filza said, I think it's really it's been something people have wanted to do for a while to start challenging Roe v. Wade, but I think like they took the timing of the who's on the Supreme Court and are kind of moving with that and trying to reverse it state by state. And I think what's problematic about Texas is we've already seen since Texas passed their original bill that a lot of states have followed. Some are passing more like bills that are more what's the word, like restrictive. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word. More restrictive. Like Ohio, like just came out with a bill a few days ago that basically bans all abortions. So I think it's just like going to start a really bad wave that is ultimately going to try to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely seen that this bill in Texas is kind of setting a precedent, and depending on who you are, for me personally, it is definitely an unfortunate precedent. And that's so interesting that both of you said that you first heard of it on social media, because that's also how I first heard about it. And it's kind of an interesting kind of exercise in like perspective, because me being a female UCLA student in Southern California, the way that I found out about it on social media was people being outraged. But obviously, the fact that this bill and this sort of this kind of bill is gaining so much traction across the United States, that means that in other parts of our country, even other parts of our state, that this bill is not being met with outrage. That this is kind of a like finally kind of situation in other parts of our country. So now to transition onto the impact on other communities, legal scholars predict that state lawmakers will start including citizen lawsuit provisions in other types of laws with the same goals, evading established judicial review and sowing division in communities. Many worry that we could see this same tactic applied to other divisive issues such as LGBTQ plus discrimination. For example, a Tennessee law enacted this year allows students, parents, or teachers to sue a public school and collect damages for alleged quote unquote psychological, emotional, or physical harm if they allow transgender students to use the same bathroom, sleeping quarters, or changing facility of people as the opposite sex. What are the implications of this bill, specifically the introduction of citizens enforcement for the underserved and marginalized communities of the United States? So again, whichever one of you wants to go first.
Yeah. So I refer to this provision as the bounty provision, and that's also what I think a lot of scholars have also been calling it. But the thing is, I was at a conference with Professor Michelle Goodwin. She's a huge intersectional reproductive justice advocate, and she talked about how this has been an effort on the right for a very, very long time, and it has a lot of funding. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint for them. So it's been very, very methodical. She also talked about how the original law was for the death penalty for women who sought abortions. So this is the watered down version of it. And I think in the negotiations, when they watered this down, how it was explained was they, like, the people who didn't want to water it down wanted some way to help enforce it, like these extremists who really, really, really cared about this death penalty and stuff. And so this was a way for them to get what they wanted as well. And it's really, really dangerous because it enforces a culture of fear in women who are trying to seek abortions, because they feel like they can't tell anyone. They feel like they're alone, which is so, so dangerous. And Professor Michelle Goodwin, when she was talking about this, she also talked about how, like, this was similar to US fugitive slave laws, because people were given incentives to find runaway slaves. And so it's obviously not as direct of a correlation, but it's still there, especially because and we can like go into this later, but this is a death sentence for a lot of Black women. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of on that fear piece, I was reading like an article published by a law professor at UCLA, and he was basically saying that not only does this harm the people like directly in Texas who can't get access to abortions, or the abortion providers who are scared to like even give abortions, it kind of like spreads this like maneuvers this citizen enforcement. Obviously the implications like spread way beyond what they see just because of the verbiage of this law.
Yeah, and kind of on that note of fear mongering, I think it's most important to keep in mind that this bill doesn't ban abortions. This bill doesn't end abortions. This ends safe abortions. That puts specifically marginalized communities, women of color, um, that puts them directly in the crossfire of this bill. So they're the real victims of who this bill is hurting. And to go off of what Filza said about the death penalty, how this is the watered down version of the bill, how Hammurabian, like an eye for an eye, that's not very pro-life of them, so to speak. But that's just my 2 cents. So into the Supreme Court involvement, the Supreme Court has recently seemed skeptical of SB 8, the Texas abortion law, even garnering questioning from 2 of the court's most recent conservative appointees. Do you guys think that this indicates hope for the future safety of Roe v. Wade in the Supreme Court, or is this unexpected challenge specific to this law's citizen enforcement nature?
Personally, one thing I have like compared it to, I think if this were California, like trying to do the same like thing with citizens reporting other citizens for having guns. This is like a total different like sphere, but I feel like that would be shut down right away. And it's like largely because of the makeup of the Supreme Court. Um, so I do think that they are going to question stuff, and maybe they'll question the wordage of the law and maybe shut down a few versions of Texas law. But I feel like there's going to be hearings. I know like on December 1st, there's a hearing of Mississippi's law or Ohio's, one of the two, who also passed restrictive abortion laws, and they're hearing their case. So I don't know, maybe this particular law won't get passed under the Supreme Court, but I do think that it also has to do largely with the wording. If states can write a law that basically makes it so like the current Supreme Court supports it and can find a way to like get around some of the Constitution, I don't think that it'll matter that they question some of these parts of Texas's SB 8.
Yeah. Actually, what Sarah was talking about, that reminded me today, this morning, I read an article about how a guns rights group in Texas signed on, published a brief supporting the abortion activists in Texas and saying that this abortion law is wrong because they were scared that the same like bounty provision would be applied to them later. So I don't, unless something stops this from happening, this is going to be used as a framework for a lot of other things. It's also starting to become used. These abortion restrictions are also starting to become templates to restrict access to gender affirmative care. Lisa Mikamoto, she's a UC Davis law professor. She was talking about how it's really, really difficult to get gender affirmative care as it is now, but now they're like starting to go after minors who are seeking access to this type of care and criminalizing them and criminalizing their parents and stuff like that. So this isn't just related to abortion.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a domino effect, and it would be foolish and ignorance to pretend that this is a singular issue or only a feminist issue. So if the law were to go unattested and passed in other states, what do you see as the future of abortion in America? Do you think that nonprofits will continue to be as overwhelmed as they are now? It's a big question, I know.
It's a big question. So the first part of the question is, if the law were to go unattested and passed in other states, what do you see as the future of abortion in America? I think to answer that question, we need to think about who uses abortion the most, like who does this impact? So in Texas specifically, we'll just even look at Texas right now. There's 7 million women of childbearing age, so it impacts them. Specifically, it also impacts teenagers who also don't realize, who often don't realize that they're pregnant until later on in a pregnancy. It impacts low-income folks who need an abortion procedure is about $550 to $600 in Texas right now to cover the cost, including like undocumented immigrants. It hurts minors, who in Texas they need permission from their parents to get like an abortion, and a lot of minors have to go to court because of it. Undocumented folks. So that's just in Texas, but even just like throughout the United States. I believe you can fact check this later, but in the conference I was in, the law professors cited that Black women use abortion services at the highest rate, and 70% of abortions in Texas were provided to women of color. So I think that just gives perspective as to who is going to be impacted, and it's not going to be the rich white men that passed this law. Um, yeah.
Yeah, like looking at that aspect, you also have to consider like these women, a lot of the people who can't get abortions in Texas, they'll either have to go to another state, which first of all costs money. People will have to take time off of work. People will have to find childcare if they have other children, which has a disproportionate effect on communities of color. And then you also have to look at some of these women will be taking something about SB 8. It doesn't include the provision to essentially women are still able to take a pill that can incite abortion. But a lot of times these pills have complications. So that brings on a whole nother list. And providers might be literally like afraid to provide care for these women because they may be afraid they'll get fined with this bounty provision. So I feel like there's a lot of like factors. And also one of the big things is this bill, there's no exceptions for rape or incest, which is huge. Like it's kind of sad that at this point in 2021 we're talking about like getting rid of abortion more than we're talking about rape provisions. So that's another thing that's like kind of scary about like this law, and that this law is being used as a roadmap to other laws, especially because like a dozen other states have already followed and are creating just as invasive policies for their citizens. So I don't know if that exactly answered the question, but there's a lot of like adverse effects this law can have, and like on the future of Roe v. Wade and just the future of abortion in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that, Sarah. And I think another thing that I would just really like to put out there for this episode is that abortion, the way that it's presented in the media, has such a taboo. Abortion is not something that women do for fun, so to speak. It's an extremely traumatic physical, or it can be an extremely traumatic physical and emotional experience. And another thing, Filza touched on that the rich white men who are passing this bill are not going to be affected by it. They're not going to be getting abortions. And Sarah then went on to mention how going to another state for an abortion means you need childcare, you need money to travel to another state. Abortions are not free. You can get financial help, but a lot of the time abortions do cost money, and that is an obstacle for some women. And I think it's important that it's not only rich white men that are going to be unaffected, but rich white women will also find themselves maybe having an easier time getting into loopholes that will provide them reproductive care or abortive care. So again, it does come down to who are we hurting with this bill? We are hurting victims of rape who are specifically women of color. We are hurting transgender women or men who still have uteruses and can't afford care or gender affirming surgery or medical care, so to speak. So it's really important that we remind ourselves and continue the rhetoric that abortion is not something that women do because they're evil and they want to kill babies. It's something that is done out of necessity, and it's almost always what's best for the mother, and we don't want any more babies in this world who can't be taken care of. So Caroline, I'm going to go ahead and pass off to you now.
Yeah, if I could hop in there, those are some great points that you all made. One thing about the last question that you just asked me, something that I noticed and looked a lot into when this law was first passed was how the nonprofits were being affected by its passing and the influx of need for their services. I know that there was one nonprofit called Frontera Fund that was really overwhelmed and it almost had to completely halt its services. It was one of those that was trying to get women in need out of Texas to its border states in order to access an abortion if it needed one. And I think that when this law was passed, we saw a huge dependency on nonprofits such as this and similar to those. And it's unreasonable to put all of our eggs in one basket in those instances, and kind of completely depend on them to get something that should just be a human right. Um, I think that, I mean, it's a huge hypothetical question, but if the law were to go unattested and passed in other states, of course, like Mia, you mentioned earlier, it's not stopping abortion, it's stopping safe abortion and it's stopping equal access to abortion, as if there was even equal access right now before those laws were passed. But I think that the biggest thing that we would see if any of these laws were to go unattested and to continue to be passed would be just a huge increase in the inequity in access to this. And like Mia, you were talking about, it's not affecting even just the rich white women that are able to access abortion right now. It would be even more negatively affecting the marginalized communities that need access to those in the future.
Thank you, Caroline. This episode definitely does hit a little bit close to home for me. As a young woman, obviously this is a super coming of age right now. This is a super disheartening, not disheartening. This is tragic. This is a tragic piece of legislation, and this is a hateful piece of legislation. And that is not the BPU speaking. That is Mia Thorson speaking. Also, disclaimer. And while this is, I don't want to end on a depressing note. I would like to thank Caroline and Shannon and Sara and Filza for bringing your super intellectual and well thought out thoughts to this podcast episode. We wouldn't be able to do it without you. It wouldn't hit home without you guys. And thank you for being brave enough to come and talk about this, because I know right now it is a divisive issue and it can be definitely scary as a woman to share your thoughts on this. So thank you guys very, very much. And if Sara or Filza, you guys have any closing statements, you're more than welcome to say them now.
Yeah, I actually have a little bit as an ending note, if that's okay. So I just kind of wanted to talk about the Turned Away study, which was talked about by Tabitha Harkin. She's an OBGYN, but the study followed women for 5 years after they were turned away from abortion, and they were 4 times more likely to live below the poverty line. They had a higher chance of staying with abusive partners, higher rates of anxiety and depression, and a lot of other really, really horrible factors. And I think that just shows how important it is for women to get these services when they need them. And I think a huge thing that can, if people are really, really passionate about lowering abortion rates, then we need to decrease the barriers to access contraceptives. So for example, birth control currently needs a prescription. Currently, employers are trying to stop your healthcare from covering contraceptive because some employers think that contraceptives are abortion, and they don't ethically believe in them, so they're trying to take that access away from their employees. For a lot of private insurances as well, even if you have insurance, we're not even going to talk about the people who don't have insurance and can't afford it because they need a prescription, but even if you have private insurance, you might not have the means to afford it because of some of the laws passed in Trump era. And so these things are really, really important. I also think that living in California, a lot of us are UCLA students. We think that we are very far away from this issue, but the right wing is also working its way into California, and I think we also need to be a little bit aware about that. So there have been coercive sterilization attempts in prisons recently. Catholic hospitals have been trying to form alliances with UC systems to like hurt reproductive health care access. There have been several attempts to pass laws about parental consent to restrict abortion access. And all of that type of stuff. And so even though California is very liberal, like we are not safe. No one is safe right now. And so this is really, really, really important.
Yeah, on that note, I think it's important to stress how many areas this one, I know like a lot of people like may like assume that this is just one law, but it brings up so many different things and problems with the introduction of this law since September 1st. And I think honestly the threat of Roe v. Wade being overturned is like very real right now, and we have to like keep looking at like the Supreme Court, because they can try to go unnoticed, but like I feel like as like students and as like activists, I don't think it's a good idea for us to like let that happen. And I think what we just need to keep doing is like talking about it and like not letting it go under the rug, because um it is honestly scary like being a woman and having all this happen, especially like in college. And um like even Ronald Reagan, the hospital by our school, we can't even go there and get a rape test kit. um it's like there's so many areas that we need to consider. And yeah, this isn't the end, I would say. So just keep working hard, but thank you guys for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both for those closing remarks. I think that it's really important, like you both said, to keep in mind our involvement in this issue and how close in proximity the threats could be to us in the future. So, with that, I just wanted to have some closing remarks. If you have any questions or suggestions regarding video ideas, information that you'd like to see, or what guests to invite to the podcast, please contact the Bruin Political Union at bpu@g.ucla.edu. We'd also like to say a huge thank you to Ignite UCLA and Filza and Sara for coming on and chatting with us today. This was such a great conversation, and we would invite our audience to check out Ignite at UCLA on Instagram, look at what they're doing, and possibly think about joining.